Dressed to Kill by Ceri Clarke. Part of the Heinous History short stories series. Chapter 1. Matilda Scheurer coughed foam the colour of spring onto her embroidery. Droplets of it, mint-tinted and frothy, splattered across the artificial leaves she'd been so carefully crafting for Lady Harrington's new bonnet. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her spit matched the emerald pigment dusting her fingertips. A moment later, her supervisor's shadow fell across her workspace. "Not on the merchandise, Miss Scheurer." Mrs. Driscoll's voice had the texture of sandpaper wrapped in velvet. She produced a handkerchief from her sleeve and thrust it toward Matilda. "The Harrington order leaves tomorrow morning." Matilda wiped her mouth, the handkerchief coming away stained with a substance that resembled crushed pea soup. "Sorry, ma'am." Mrs. Driscoll lingered, her gaze fixed on Matilda's trembling hands. "You look peaky. The usual remedy might help." The usual remedy was gin, watered down and kept in a communal flask beneath the workbench. It burned the throat, but, more importantly, masked symptoms. Symptoms that might suggest a girl wasn't fit for her position. Symptoms that had seen 3 girls disappear from the workshop in the past month alone. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll manage." Mrs. Driscoll nodded curtly and moved on to inspect the other girls hunched over their work. 20 pairs of hands manipulating silk, cotton, and wire into delicate replicas of nature's bounty, all destined for the hats and gowns of London's elite. Matilda returned to her task, squinting as she dipped the fabric leaves into the bright emerald dye. The colour was called Scheele's green, named after the chemist who'd created it. But inside her lungs, it was arsenic, not that anyone was supposed to mention that fact. Sometimes she wondered if Carl Scheele knew, if when he'd mixed copper and arsenic to create this jewel-like pigment, he'd understood that young women like Matilda would be slowly poisoned by his legacy. Probably not. Men with names important enough to christen colours rarely thought about girls like her. Matilda lifted the newly dyed leaf and pinned it to the drying line strung above her workbench. Green droplets fell onto her lap, adding new stains to her already mottled apron. They joined the constellation of emerald specks that had become a permanent feature of her skin, glittering like tiny verdant stars mapping her slow death. But the colour, God, the colour was magnificent. Chapter 2. Matilda's room in the boarding house on Grafton Street was barely large enough for her narrow bed and the washstand, but she'd grown accustomed to its confines. She shared it with Betsy Finch, another flower girl who worked at Madame Leopold's 2 streets over. They slept in shifts, Matilda by night, Betsy by day, an arrangement that gave each of them the illusion of privacy. "You're late," Betsy remarked, already dressed in her work clothes, hair pinned up beneath a faded cotton cap. "Busy night?" Matilda shook her head, setting her basket on the bed. "Overtime. The Harrington order." "Ah, the emerald leaves." Betsy grimaced. "Madame Leopold's got us doing peony stamens in that colour. Half the girls can't stop their noses bleeding. Mrs. Driscoll says it's female troubles." "Female troubles don't make your eyeballs go green, Tilly." Matilda said nothing, unpinning her hair at the cracked mirror. Her reflection stared back, a ghost imitation of the effervescent girl who'd arrived in London 3 years ago. At 18, she should have been in the full bloom of youth. Instead, her complexion had a waxy pallor, her once bright eyes now ringed with shadows. Only her hair kept its lustre, a rich chestnut that fell past her shoulders when freed from its pins. "There's a letter," Betsy said, nodding toward the small table between their beds. "From home, I think." Matilda's heart sank. Letters from Oxford meant her mother needed money again. Money Matilda could ill afford to send. But send it she would, because that's what dutiful daughters did, especially when their widowed mothers took in sewing to make ends meet. She would read it later, after she'd slept. Sleep was the only remedy she had these days, the only respite from the constant tremors, the metallic taste that lingered on her tongue, the creeping numbness in her fingertips. Betsy hesitated at the door. You're worse, aren't you? Matilda forced a smile. I'm just tired. Go on, you'll be late. Once alone, she unlaced her boots, wincing as she peeled them from her swollen feet. The skin around her ankles was blotchy, mottled with the same rash that had spread across her forearms and neck. She eased herself onto the bed, still in her work dress, too exhausted to change. Sleep claimed her quickly, but it was troubled by dreams in which she drowned in a sea of emerald green, gasping for air that never came. Chapter 3. You're being promoted, Mrs. Driscoll announced the following evening, appearing suddenly at Matilda's workstation, like an apparition in bombazine and jet beads. Come with me. Promotion was an alien concept in the flower workshop. Girls either stayed at their benches until they died, married, or disappeared. Matilda exchanged confused glances with Sarah, the girl beside her, before setting down her work and following Mrs. Driscoll to the back office. Inside, a vision in crimson silk turned from the window. The woman was perhaps 40, with steel grey hair coiled severely beneath a hat festooned with birds and berries. Her gaze swept over Matilda with clinical detachment. This is her? The woman asked Mrs. Driscoll, as if Matilda weren't present. Yes, Madame Beaumont, our most skilled hand with the emerald pigment. Madame Beaumont circled Matilda once, then again, like a predator assessing its prey. She'll do, the right height and slender enough. The complexion needs work, too sallow, but rouge will fix that. Mrs. Driscoll cleared her throat. Miss Scheurer, Madame Beaumont owns the most exclusive dressmaking salon in Mayfair. She has a proposition for you. Not a proposition, Mrs. Driscoll. An opportunity. Madame Beaumont's voice was like cut crystal, sharp and precise. Scheele's green is the height of fashion this season. Every lady of quality wants a gown in that shade. But before they commission such an expensive piece, they want to see how it looks when worn. Matilda's mind raced ahead. You want me to model the dresses? For 3 days a week, yes. You'll stand in the salon and demonstrate the gowns to potential clients. Your wage will be double what you earn here, and you'll still have 4 days at your regular position. Double the wage. She was going to get double the money she could send home, double the respect, because no one looked at flower girls, but everyone noticed the model in the center of a fashionable salon. When do I start? Matilda asked, not stopping to consider why someone of Madame Beaumont's stature would hire from the workshops rather than from the chorus lines or art schools where most fashion models were found. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. Madame Beaumont handed her a card, embossed with an address in Mayfair. Don't be late. As the door closed behind Madame Beaumont, Mrs. Driscoll turned to Matilda with an uncharacteristic smile. Well done, girl. You've been noticed. What Mrs. Driscoll didn't say, what neither of them acknowledged, was that being noticed was both a blessing and a curse in their world. To be seen was to be valuable, but visibility had its own price. Especially when what made you visible was the same thing slowly killing you. Chapter 4. Madame Beaumont's salon occupied the ground floor of a gleaming white townhouse on Brook Street. Inside, it was decorated with shades of cream and gold, with plush carpets that swallowed the sound of footsteps. Mirrors were positioned around the room to catch the light in a flattering glow. It smelled of beeswax and expensive perfume, so different from the acidic tang of dye and desperation that permeated the flower workshop. There you are, Madame Beaumont said, appearing from a back room. Follow me. Matilda was led to a small dressing chamber where 3 gowns hung on a brass rack. Even to her untrained eye, they were exquisite confections of silk and lace in the vibrant emerald hue that had become the season's most coveted shade. You'll wear the first one today, Madame Beaumont instructed, gesturing to the simplest of the 3. Ernestine will help you dress. Ernestine, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and quick hands, assisted Matilda out of her shabby work dress and into the green silk creation. The dress was the most beautiful thing Matilda had ever worn, with a nipped waist, full skirt, and delicate embroidery along the bodice. It also weighed a ton, the layers of fabric and crinoline forming a cage around her lower body. "It burns," Matilda whispered, as Ernestine fastened the back. "It's just the newness of the dye," Ernestine replied dismissively. "You'll get used to it." But as the morning progressed, the burning intensified. Standing in the center of the salon as wealthy women circled her, exclaiming over the vibrant color, Matilda felt as if her skin was on fire. Everywhere the fabric touched, her neck, arms, waist became inflamed, but she dared not complain. Not with Madame Beaumont's eyes on her, and certainly not with double wages at stake. By noon, she was sweating profusely, the perspiration creating rivulets down her back and between her breasts. When Ernestine helped her change for luncheon, she noticed with horror that her sweat had taken on a greenish tinge, staining the undergarments she wore beneath the gown. "That happens," Ernestine said with a shrug. "The pigment seeps into everything. Wait till you see what it does to your chamber pot." After a meager lunch of bread and soup, served in a small alcove off the kitchen, Matilda was stuffed back into the gown for the afternoon session. This time, an elegant matron with silver-streaked hair and a lorgnette inspected her. "What a healthy glow the girl has," she remarked to Madame Beaumont. "The colour suits her admirably. I shall have a gown made in exactly this shade." Healthy glow. Matilda almost laughed. What the woman mistook for vitality was fever, her skin flushed with the toxic reaction to the dye. But she held her tongue, smiled, and pivoted slowly so the potential client could absorb the full effect of the emerald silk. By the end of the day, Matilda's skin was on fire, her eyes bloodshot, and her head pounding. But when Madame Beaumont pressed 3 shillings into her palm, more money than she usually saw in a week, she decided she could live with it. After all, what was a little discomfort compared to the thrill of being seen, of being admired, even if only as a living mannequin? She returned to her boarding house that night and wrote to her mother. "I have been promoted. Extra money coming soon. Tell Father Williams I'll contribute to the church roof fund next month." She decided not to mention the rash spreading across her torso, or the strange numbness in her toes, or that when she finally made it to their shared chamber pot, her urine was the colour of new spring leaves. Some truths were better left unwritten. Chapter 5. The next 2 months established a rhythm. 4 days at the flower workshop, where she dipped artificial flowers into toxic dye until her fingers went numb. 3 days at Madame Beaumont's, modelling emerald gowns for ladies who gushed over the vibrant hue while remaining oblivious to its effects. Nosebleeds became a daily occurrence. At first, she concealed them, excusing herself to the privy or pressing a handkerchief to her face when no one was looking. But one Tuesday morning, as she stood surrounded by potential clients, blood erupted from her nostrils with such force that it splattered onto the pristine bodice of the emerald gown. "Good heavens!" exclaimed a customer, recoiling in horror. Madame Beaumont swooped in, guiding Matilda to the back room while murmuring apologies. Once they were alone, her demeanour changed. "This is unacceptable," she hissed, dabbing at the bloodstains with a cloth. "Do you have any idea how much this fabric costs?" "I'm sorry," Matilda stammered, head tilted back to stem the flow. "It just happens sometimes. Make sure it doesn't happen again, and you'll pay for the cleaning." That same week, Emily Jenkins, a flower girl who worked at Matilda's bench, collapsed mid-shift. One moment she was attaching stamens to a batch of silk roses. The next, she was on the floor, convulsing, foam flecking her lips. "Female troubles," Mrs. Driscoll declared as 2 stock boys carried Emily away. "Back to work, all of you." But Matilda had glimpsed Emily's eyes as they rolled back in her head, the whites tinged with green, like algae on a pond. No monthly affliction did that to a woman. No natural condition turned human fluids the color of poison. That night, she lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to Betsy's gentle snores from the day shift. Her tongue felt swollen, her throat raw. When she bit it accidentally, her mouth filled with blood that tasted metallic and looked verdant in the dim light of their single candle. She was dying. They all were. And for what? So that ladies of quality could parade around in the most fashionable shade of the season. The next morning, she made the decision. She would see a doctor. Not the butcher who attended to the workshop girls when they were too sick to stand, but a real physician who might tell her the truth about what was happening to her body. It took all her savings and the pawning of her mother's cameo brooch, the only thing of value she owned, to secure an appointment with Dr. Harrison, a young physician with a practice off Harley Street. He came recommended by the charwoman who cleaned his offices, whose daughter had worked in the flower trade before marriage had saved her. Dr. Harrison listened without interruption as Matilda catalogued her symptoms: the nosebleeds, the tremors, the rashes, the green-tinged bodily fluids. When she finished, he performed a brief examination, checking her pulse, peering into her eyes and mouth, palpating her abdomen through her clothing. "Miss Scheurer," he said finally, his voice grave, "your symptoms suggest arsenical poisoning." The words landed like stones, heavy with the weight of confirmation rather than revelation. "From the green dye," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Scheele's green contains copper arsenite, a highly toxic compound. Prolonged exposure through inhalation, skin contact, or ingestion can be fatal. And wearing it, the dresses, especially dangerous. The dye transfers to the skin through perspiration. When the fabric heats against the body, it can release arsenical vapor that is then inhaled. He hesitated. "Miss Scheurer, I must be frank. Another month in either that factory or those gowns might kill you." She nodded, numb to everything but the bitter taste of confirmation. "Is there a cure?" "Remove yourself from the source of arsenic, completely and immediately." "And if I can't?" "Then I suggest you make peace with your maker, Miss Scheurer. Arsenical poisoning is not a gentle death." Outside his office, London continued its bustling dance of commerce and ambition. Carriages rattled past. Ladies in vibrant gowns strolled arm in arm. Newspaper boys shouted the day's headlines. No one noticed the slight figure who emerged from the doctor's office, her face as pale as the handkerchief clutched in her trembling hand. Matilda had a choice to make. But what kind of choice was it really when her mother depended on her wage? When Mrs. Driscoll had told her girls were lining up for her spot? When Madame Beaumont had 3 more emerald gowns for her to model that week? So she smiled, tucked the doctor's advice into the same compartment of her mind where she stored other impossible dreams, and picked up her scissors the next morning as if nothing had changed. Chapter 6. Poison Dress Kills Flower Girl. The headline screamed from newsstands across London, accompanied by a crude illustration of a woman in a billowing green gown, her face contorted in agony. Matilda stared at it as she passed a boy hawking papers outside the omnibus station. Not her name in the headline, thank God, but Alice Thornton's, a girl from Madame Leopold's who'd been modelling emerald gowns similar to those Matilda wore at Beaumont's. Alice had died screaming, they said. Her skin blistered, her internal organs tinged green. The autopsy had found enough arsenic in her body to kill several grown men. "Fashion that kills," proclaimed another paper. "Deadly beauty, the truth about emerald green," declared a third. For a brief, incandescent moment, it seemed as if people cared, as if the deaths of working girls mattered, as if the toxic tide of green might finally recede. That afternoon, Matilda was summoned to Madame Beaumont's office. "There will be no modelling this week," the dressmaker announced without preamble. "This unfortunate business with the Leopold girl has made clients nervous." Her name was Alice, Matilda said, surprising herself with her boldness. Madame Beaumont's eyebrows arched. I beg your pardon. Alice Thornton, not the Leopold girl. She had a name. A tense silence stretched between them. Then Madame Beaumont sighed, her expression softening fractionally. Yes, well, names do little good for the dead, Miss Scheurer. Will you stop using the emerald dye? Don't be absurd. It's simply a matter of reassuring clients. The papers exaggerate, as they always do. Scientists claim one thing, fashion experts another. She waved a dismissive hand. By next week, everyone will be talking about the royal baby gossip, and this will be forgotten. She was right, of course. Within days, the fervour died down. The newspapers moved on to more palatable stories. A society wedding, a political scandal, the imminent birth of another royal heir. Alice Thornton's death became a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered among workshop girls, but dismissed by those with the power to effect change. The British government, pressured by manufacturing interests, refused to regulate the use of arsenical dyes. Too profitable, they said. Too important to the textile industry. Besides, the evidence was anecdotal, the risks exaggerated. And so Matilda returned to Madame Beaumont's the following week, stepping into yet another emerald gown, feeling the familiar burn as the fabric settled against her raw skin. Such a magnificent colour, cooed one client, circling her like a vulture. My husband will be absolutely green with envy when he sees the bill. Matilda forced a smile, ignoring the blood she could taste at the back of her throat. She needed the money. Her mother's latest letter spoke of leaking roofs and empty pantries. Of neighbours' charity, that wouldn't last. But standing there, a living advertisement for the poison slowly killing her, Matilda felt something shift inside her, a calcification of the spirit to match the hardening of her arteries. She was replaceable, disposable. One more nameless girl in an endless line of sacrifices on the altar of fashion. That night, she wrote 2 letters, one to her mother, enclosing most of her wages, the other to the editor of the Times, detailing the effects of the emerald dye on those who worked with it daily. She signed it simply a flower girl, knowing that using her real name would mean instant dismissal. The letter was never published. Perhaps it never arrived. Or perhaps, as was more likely, no one cared about the testimony of a working-class girl when set against the interests of commerce and fashion. Chapter 7. By December, Matilda could no longer hide her deterioration. Her hair fell out in clumps, her nails had turned brittle and greenish, and the whites of her eyes had taken on a jaundiced hue. Walking the short distance from her lodgings to the workshop left her winded, her heart racing erratically beneath her shabby bodice. "You look frightful," Mrs. Driscoll remarked one evening, eyeing Matilda's trembling hands as she attempted to attach stamens to a cluster of artificial violets. "Perhaps a rest is in order?" A rest. The euphemism hung in the air between them. Workers who took rests rarely returned. "I'm well enough," Matilda insisted, though every breath felt like inhaling fire. "Just tired." That same night, Sarah, the girl who worked beside her, leaned in close while Mrs. Driscoll was occupied elsewhere. "There's talk," she whispered. "A parliamentary commission. About the dyes. They say there might be regulations." Hope flared briefly in Matilda's chest. "When?" Sarah shrugged. "Who knows? Next year, perhaps. Or the one after that." Too late for her, then. Too late for Alice Thornton and Emily Jenkins and all the others whose names had already been forgotten. The next morning, Matilda coughed blood onto her pillow, bright red streaked with emerald. The sight of it, so vividly, obscenely colourful, should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange detachment, as if watching the final act of a play she'd known the ending to all along. She dressed with painstaking care, selecting her least patched dress, twisting her thinning hair into a semblance of its former glory. Christmas was approaching, and the workshop was busier than ever, churning out festive ornaments and millinery in the obligatory Yuletide colours, including, of course, emerald green for holly leaves and wreaths. The workshop was stifling when she arrived, the air thick with dust and dye particles. Mrs. Driscoll was demonstrating a new technique for creating frosted berries, her voice droning on about the importance of accuracy. Matilda took her seat, reaching for her scissors with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. The first wave of dizziness hit as she measured out a length of wire for a holly stem. The second came as she dipped the wire into the familiar pot of emerald dye. By the third, she knew what was happening. "Ma'am!" she croaked, rising unsteadily from her bench. "I think I—" The floor rushed up to meet her before she could finish the sentence. Through a haze, she heard shouting, felt hands turning her over. Someone was calling her name. Someone else was saying to fetch water. Smelling salts, a doctor. "No, doctor." Mrs. Driscoll's voice cut through the noise. "Take her to the back room." Matilda felt herself being lifted, carried through the workshop as if she weighed nothing, which perhaps she did, whittled away by months of slow poisoning, until she was little more than a scaffold of bones draped in poisoned skin. The back room was where they put girls who were too ill to work, but not yet dead, a space between productivity and the grave. They laid her on a narrow cot, someone loosening her collar, another placing a damp cloth on her forehead. "Fetch her things," Mrs. Driscoll ordered. "She won't be coming back." Matilda wanted to protest, to say she'd be fine in a minute, just needed to catch her breath. But when she tried to speak, only a gurgle emerged, followed by a gush of foaming green liquid that tasted of metal and earth. She clawed at her throat, fingers scraping against the emerald ribbon she wore there, a scrap from one of Madame Beaumont's gowns that she'd kept as a talisman. It felt like it was choking her now, constricting with each laboured breath. As consciousness ebbed, Matilda thought she heard Dr. Harrison's voice again. Another month in either that factory or those gowns might kill you. He'd been right about the timing, at least. Chapter 8. Her funeral was a sparse affair, a plain shroud, a pauper's grave. A handful of workshop girls permitted 30 minutes away from their benches to see her buried. No emerald adornments. No one could afford colour in death. Back at the workshop, Mrs. Driscoll had her bench cleared by noon, her scissors and pins redistributed, her name crossed off the wage ledger with a single, decisive stroke. The green ribbon she'd worn was salvaged from her personal effects. "Waste not, want not," Mrs. Driscoll had said before giving it to Sarah, who accepted it with trembling hands. The factory continued production. The emerald dresses remained on display in Madame Beaumont's salon. Several newspapers, which had briefly noted the death of another workshop girl, suspected arsenical poisoning, moved on to more sensational topics. At Westminster, members of Parliament debated the issue of toxic dyes, citing the mounting evidence from medical journals. But the manufacturing lobby was powerful, the economic arguments compelling. Legislation would take years, even decades. Dr. Harrison, who performed the autopsy as a courtesy to the coroner, and out of his own morbid curiosity, confirmed what he'd already known. Matilda's body contained enough arsenic to kill several adults. Her internal organs had a distinctly greenish tinge, her lungs mottled with the pigment she'd breathed in day after day. Her fingernails, still stained from years of work with the toxic dye, had turned emerald in death, a macabre fashion statement that would outlive her. The Medical Times published her case alongside others, a growing catalogue of casualties in fashion's relentless march forward, a footnote in medical history, a cautionary tale for future generations. But that vibrant emerald hue, that shimmering, seductive green that had captured the imagination of a generation, lived on. Rebranded as Paris green to distance it from the scandal, It continued to adorn drawing rooms and ball gowns, toys and wallpaper until safer alternatives were eventually developed decades later. In time, even Matilda's name was forgotten. One more anonymous victim in fashion's collateral damage. Her wooden cross weathered and rotted. The paupers section of the cemetery eventually repurposed for more pressing urban needs. But in Madame Beaumont's ledger, a single entry remained. Monsieur Scheurer, flower girl, good height, tolerated the emerald well, until she didn't. In Mrs. Driscoll's workshop, new girls came and went, their hands stained, their lungs scarred, their futures as uncertain as their predecessors. They breathed the same toxic air, crafted the same deadly ornaments, dreamed the same futile dreams of escape. And in a luxurious drawing room across town, a wealthy matron reclined on her emerald-upholstered chaise, sipping tea from a porcelain cup, admiring her reflection in a gilded mirror. The shade of her gown matched her drapes perfectly, that vibrant, fashionable hue that had cost so little to produce and so much to create. The green was still fashionable, Matilda less so. But in 1859 London, such deaths were merely the cost of doing business in the magnificent, murderous world of fashion, a world where beauty killed and memory erased the wrong people, a world where the most vibrant colour on the palette was painted with the lives of young women who simply wanted to be seen. Historical side effects. Disclaimer: Arsenic edition. This story is for entertainment purposes only. Do not attempt to recreate Victorian fashion without flame-retardant corsetry, poison-proof petticoats, and a licensed toxicologist. Side effects may include green-stained fingertips, a suspicious cough, floral hallucinations, and the sudden realization that your wardrobe is trying to murder you. Prolonged exposure to fashionable death may cause arsenic absorption, chromatic obsession, and the belief that beauty must literally be pain. May also lead to fainting at balls, seasonal hysteria, and lingering ghostliness in portraiture. Do not wear if pregnant, breathing, or planning to attend a public function. If your dress glows in candlelight and your suitors stop writing, consult a mortician. Not safe for milliners, colour chemists, or anyone who sweats while looking stunning. Use of this story may cause readers to question whether Victorian science was just witchcraft in a waistcoat. And yes, the green was that shade of deadly. This tale has been brought to you by poor regulation, rich aesthetics, and one hell of a hatpin.